Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So things change when our thinking changes. So why do so many organisations keep applying the same outdated mental models to the complex problems we face? After 30 years of extensive research, Doctors Derek and Laura Cabrera have uncovered what it really takes to apply systems thinking for the improvement of our society, organisation, our education systems, and much more. Today, we're absolutely honoured to be joined by two trailblazing and prolific leaders in the systems thinking world. Laura and Derek are on a grand mission to educate, engage, and empower 7 billion systems thinkers to solve the problems we face. Derek is a distinguished systems and cognitive scientist and faculty member at Cornell University, and he serves as Secretary General of the International Academy for Systems and Cyber Sciences. His fascinating career started out as a mountain guide, and his career has spanned research, fellowships, and advisory role with institutions like West Point. Laura is a renowned expert in systems thinking and leadership, and she teaches at Cornell University and directs the Systems Thinking, Modelling and Leadership program. With a background in policy analysis and public administration, she spent over 25 years translating complex systems science into practical applications for businesses, schools and government agencies, and she's led national research initiatives with organisations like the National Academy of Sciences, USDA and the US Department of Justice. Together, they co-founded the Cabrera Research Lab, a science-to-society lab focused on bridging the gap between systems science and real-world impact. And they're overseeing the world's largest systems thinking conference at Cornell, which is coming up in May. And they've launched Training Camp, an innovative platform for developing your systems thinking skill. They're co-authors of several influential books, including Systems Thinking Made Simple and the brilliant Flock, Not Clock. I can never pronounce that correctly. And they also co-host my favourite podcast, the Cabrera Lab podcast, which ranks in the top 2% of all podcasts worldwide. So welcome to the world of RDS Barbell, Peace Circle, is not. It will change the way you see the world. So thank you so much, Laura and Derek, for joining us.
Yeah, we're very excited to have you with us. So we normally kick off with a question, just tell us about the work you do, but you do so much.
We've only got an hour.
And we've only got an hour with you, so we're going to narrow that down. So some of our audience might not be overly familiar with systems thinking. So can you just give us a definition of what is systems thinking and how might it differ from other ways people think about thinking and problem solving?
Systems thinking, really, there's a lot of confusion out there. If you Google it, you're going to get all kinds of confusion about what it is, but it's actually pretty simple. We live in systems. We live in families, we live in organizations, we live on the universe, in ecologies, on Earth, in countries, you name it. These are systems that we live inside of and situations that we live inside of. And systems thinking is about how do we think more in alignment with those systems, because the systems we live in are pretty complex. They're multi-agent. There are lots of interactions going on. There's lots of change. And how do we get our thinking to be more kind of accustomed to dealing with the systems that we live in every day? So it really applies to everything, how to lead a better family life, how to lead a better personal life, better professional life. It's very pragmatic. And it's also based on a lot of science and theory as well.
Yes. And you've done decades of research on this and you've developed your own model, the DSRP model. So could you just tell us a bit more about that and why that's so fundamental to understanding systems thinking?
Yeah. It's interesting that DSRP is really not my model. It's nature's model. So it comes out of nature. Nature makes distinctions. Our brains make distinctions. We organize things into groupings. That's the S, systems, make groupings out of things. We relate things. Things are related in the real world systems. And everything kind of happens based on what position or perspective you're coming from. So if you shift your perspective, you might shift the distinctions that you see or the relationships that are relevant or the way you group things. And just those four simple patterns, which we call D, S, R, and P, are sort of fundamental to the way information is organized, both in nature, in the universe, but also in this little universe of our brain.
If I could just add to that also, based on what Derek just said, the last part is the way we organize. If you think about anytime you're taking in information from the world through any of your senses, the process by which you make meaning around that information is you're distinguishing it. You're organizing it into part whole systems. You're relating it to other things, and you're taking a perspective, if not many perspectives on it. So DSRP is, to me, the basal process by which we build understanding of anything. And it's the awareness of that, because that's happening subconsciously, unconsciously. And what systems thinking and what we're trying to do is bring all of that unconscious stuff to your consciousness, so you're aware of how you're building your ideas, how you're thinking things through. And that, to me, is the greatest tool that you could give a human on the planet, is the ability to understand how they're thinking about things. Karen.
Sorry, this is edited out. We're normally like really slick, so like we've got color-coded Miro board here. So I guess what you've done, because systems thinking has often in the past been critiqued to be a little bit too abstract, but you've really gone out to try and make sure that people can access it and use it quite simply as well. So with DSRP, I think one of the things you sort of say even within like 2 weeks, someone can take those principles and start to apply their thinking in their own world and apply it as well. How does that work? You know, what are the ways in which you can apply DSRP to normal life?
Yeah, in fact, in our research, what we found is even DSRP is very, very powerful. It's very sophisticated. It can do a lot of things, but like you said, it can feel a little abstract at first, part whole and identity, other distinctions and point view perspectives. And so what our research actually has discovered in the last decade is that there are these simple moves that you can do, and there's 5 of them that are the most important rules. They call it a Pareto law, which just means that for like 20% of the effort, you get 80% of the benefit. And these very simple moves, we call them mental moves, are just like physical moves like push-ups or sit-ups or pull-ups, except they're with your brain. And if you practice these 5 moves, those are the ones you were talking about at the beginning: perspective circle, is not list, party. They kind of have fun names. Zoom in and zoom out, and RDS barbell. If you practice those moves, then you will get really good at this stuff. Like you said, in 2 weeks' time, we've actually have research that shows 580% increases in cognitive ability immediately just from learning the moves. So it's really profoundly effective in everyday life, and you can use them on anything. You can use them in cooking dinner. You can use them to organize your organization, whatever it is that you're trying to figure out.
And one of the things that I think you sort of said, that it's that when you kind of sort of during the research phase, you actually then started to apply it in kindergarten as a way of. So what did they find from applying it in that area? And that's a tough audience, isn't it, as well?
No, not really. They're open-minded. They're lovely little humans. They haven't been trained out of systems thinking yet. So they're great. I mean, when we first started, oh my God, I hate saying 30 years ago, 25 years ago, because then I realize how old I am. But, when we first started, we were literally both at Cornell University. Derek's theory had, was the process of his doctoral research was DSRP and DSRP theory coming into the world. And we were working with what I would call sort of ornery academics. And then we wanted to really bring it out from just the walls of academia. And so we decided, let's go into schools. Let's teach it to kindergartners. And the remarkable thing about it is, with great ease and with no resistance, it was right there for them. They were already making distinctions. They just, they're distinguishing between colors, right? They're relating numbers on a number line. They're taking all kinds of perspectives on a pond. They're pretending to be a frog and looking at the pond from that perspective, and then the fly. And, so it was very simple, actually, for kindergartners, and very pleasant, I would say, of an experience. And what that really solidified for us is that these 4 things are happening in everybody's brains, as they're trying to think things through, and that we can, not just that, but that we could teach it, right? That we could help foster those skills and also help, hopefully, kids not get trained out of them when they start focusing on testing and when content takes over learning, right? Mastering content, remembering content. So to us,
and I think that's really important. What Laura's talking about is that we're kind of all born to be systems thinkers. I mean, we're born in systems, of systems, and it's really a natural way of thinking to be kind of connected to our environment and to nature and these complex ecologies and things. And in some ways, our school system trains us out of it. When we see dramatic shifts around third grade when testing becomes, important, and we start incentivizing students to get the right answer and, what the answer that the teacher's looking for, things like that. We kind of train people out of systems thinking, but we're really naturally born into systems thinking. It's something that's part of the way our brain is structured.
So how do we reinvigorate? So if it's the school system and life trains people out of it, how do we get people back into it in the workplace, for example? If there's a leader listening saying, okay, this sounds good, I want my people doing this. What do we do? Where do we start?
Well, yeah, I think it's literally things like zoom in, zoom out, right? So zoom in means whatever you're looking at, zoom into it and look at the parts. And also remember to zoom out. One of the things, for example, you can teach that to little kids. One of the things, probably the number one thing that executives come to us with, or maybe one of three things that they come to us with for organizational issues, is they're trying to train that middle level to rise up to the higher level, the C-suite. And they want what they call enterprise thinking. Well, enterprise thinking is just zoom out thinking. It's just starting at where you're at, where your task level or department level is, and sort of saying, well, let's look at it from at least one level up, where I start to see how my department connects to other departments, or how my task or my project or my initiative connects to other initiatives in the organization. That's what enterprise thinking is. And really all it is zooming out. It's seeing the whole as a part. So it sounds very simple, like you have a whole, which is the thing that you're in charge of. But if you just shift that to see that whole as a part, that means that there's a larger whole above it. And zoom in is just seeing that you're a part and you turn it into a whole and you zoom into the part. So those are just two of the moves that I talked about. But I'm sort of trying to get across that it's actually very simple if we practice it. It's not it's no more difficult than zoom in, zoom out, or P-circle, perspective circle. Take more than your own perspective. Take multiple perspectives on an issue. Da Vinci used to say, he did a lot of dissection in order to draw his remarkable drawings of the human body. And he used to say you have to cut any organ in at least 3 bisections in order to truly understand the organ. Well, that's taking multiple perspectives. In the mountains, we triangulate to find our position. That's taking multiple perspectives on the map. So taking multiple perspectives is something that you can easily train your brain and train your habit to do. You just have to do it enough for a few weeks to it becomes a habit.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's really accessible about it is the elegance of the proposal. Because one of the things that I heard that you did a study, or you did some sort of kind of work with kindergarten, and it's getting kids to look at a fire engine, and they kind of zoom. They would just normally take a drawing and not notice the detail, but in just a few moments, it quickly sort of changed the way they perceive things as well. What was that, the findings of that work?
Well, we went into, I loved our time in kindergartens, but they were teaching a state standard, which is around teaching, these were kindergartners, on all of the people in their community that help them. And obviously firefighters and all of that are part of that. So they actually would bring the fire truck to the school every year. Firemen would come and speak to the kids. And part of their project was always to come out and see the actual fire truck. And then they would draw the fire truck, and they would also build a fire truck with cardboard and milk jugs and egg cartons and all kinds of stuff that people had donated. So this particular year, this one classroom that we were working with, they had actually created a song on part whole, and it was something like every part's a whole, every whole's a part, blah, blah, blah. And it was a cute little, I can't sing, but anyway, it was a cute song when they sung it. So they learned part whole just through this song, and the teacher introduced the idea that, parts have parts and those parts have parts, and then they're part of a bigger thing. So the kids go out and they look at the fire truck and they examine it, and they do their normal lesson, and they come in to build their fire truck. And what the teachers noticed is, instead of just a cardboard box and a steering wheel, it became a cardboard box with a steering wheel with, pipe cleaners making the spokes of the wheel. And then it had a ladder, and the ladder had rungs. And the kids have the words for all of those things because they were looking for more parts. And they were looking for more parts because they had been taught that there are parts of parts of parts of parts. And these are, kindergartners, tiny little kids. And the remarkable thing is, at the end of that year, all of those kindergartners had met all the kindergarten benchmarks and some of the first grade benchmarks. So they had to actually uptrain the first grade teacher to keep teaching using DSRP so that these students would not be bored or disengaged not using those systems thinking.
Yeah, in 1 year, they kind of outpaced their teachers' training, so that we had to uptrain the teachers to get them for the kids because they were so advanced.
But the wider point of that, Garen, is if you take the example of the kindergartners just learning one of those patterns, the idea is they go out in the world and they actually look for more and they see more. They see more detail to the world. They look for more parts. Well, that's true across all 4 of the patterns, and that's true across all levels of human beings, right? So we did, I don't know if you remember the fish tank study, where we actually showed people an image of a fish tank, then we taught them one of the patterns, and then we asked them to describe the fish tank. And we did statistical analysis on it. And across the board for all 4 patterns, people saw more inside of that fish tank as a result of learning just one pattern. So it's about what I was saying, bringing that unconscious into the conscious, and then you're engaging with, as Derek said, the real world systems as they are, which is DSRP structures.
Which is, it's really fascinating, isn't it? Because one of the things you sort of say is the importance of loving reality.
Yeah.
But sometimes the more you see, the more painful it can become, because you start to think, well, hang on, I'm starting to see things I was maybe sort of through my own lens trying to block out almost. There's a double-edged side to this people need to be aware of, isn't it? That they do see more, and therefore becomes more responsibility on their part.
Yes, that's true. The love reality is the loop that we get in, where we're building a mental model, and we want to, I call it love reality, meaning you don't want to change reality to your mental model. That's called confirmation bias. You want to change your mental model to fit reality. So when we change reality to fit our mental model, that's confirmation bias. When we change our mental model to fit reality, that's us getting it right. And so loving reality allows us to get it right more often. And you're right. I mean, loving reality also causes us to have to face hard truths. But in mountaineering, we have a saying, mountaineers have a saying that the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. So, there's some truth to that. That sometimes reality can be hard to swallow, but in the long run, it kind of liberates you and it sets you free to have the decisions you make turn out the way you think they're going to, and to have your life turn out the way you hope it's going to, and all that kind of stuff. So there is some real value to loving reality.
Well, and just take it the opposite. How many times have the problems you have experienced been because you didn't understand or didn't see the full picture of the situation at that moment, right? So it's not going to work out for you on that end if you're not really seeing things as they are. And that's one of the things we talk about a lot with organizational leaders, which is you have to understand first where you're at, the reality of your situation, if you want to have different outcomes down the road.
The great thing about reality is it's very patient. So it will always give you feedback. And if you ignore the feedback, it will give it to you again, and it'll keep giving it to you until you hear it. And the beautiful thing is reality is always giving you feedback. And a lot of times people say, well, I was thinking it was going to work out this way, and then it didn't work out. Our project failed, or our software failed, or our product failed, or whatever it is that failed. And what I try to do is reframe that for folks and say, when something doesn't work out the way you think it's going to, or the way you plan it to, that's reality giving you feedback that your mental model was wrong. So we should really take that feedback. That's loving reality. Take that feedback and say, okay, well, how do I shift my mental model so that I'm in alignment with reality, so that the way that I do things works out in reality? Because, we don't want it to just work out in here. We want it to work out in reality.
And is there an element of leaders and people in organisations needing to slow down a little bit to be able to do this thinking? because
Yes.
the leaders we meet they're working at such a pace. It's just they keep going and going and going, and they don't take that time to pause and step back and look at what's going on.
Yeah, they spend all of their time putting out fires and not thinking about why the fires have started in the first place. That's exactly right. I was just going to say, when you asked your earlier question about leaders, I think part of it is understanding that to get everyone on the same page means to understand that everyone is building a mental model about whatever it is you're thinking about. And you need to understand with clarity where the differences are between and among parts of your team, between what you're thinking is, the way things should be and what they're thinking. And that means taking the time to slow down just a little bit and think about, what is the mental model everyone is building? What is the mental model we need to share before we execute, right? Before we spend time and money and resources on this, let's make sure we're really at the same starting point.
I would just put it out there, because this is a big issue that people have, especially people that think they're busy. So I know that probably doesn't sound great, but we work with a lot of C-suites, and they do kind of come with this bias where they're like, I'm going hard charging, I can't slow down. And there's a couple of things I say about that. One is, you can't afford not to think and get your mental models more accurate. You can't afford to do that. It's costing you a lot. And number two is, it's not really about slowing down. It's actually about speeding up your ability to think so that you don't have to slow down. If you practice these things, you can be very, very fast in your thinking, and you can see the systems very quickly, but you have to practice. In the same way that Navy SEAL teams and Special Forces teams, they always understand what we're talking about, because they know that to go fast and get it right, the only way to do that successfully is to practice. And that's why they spend so much time practicing. And so, yeah, you have to go fast, and yeah, you have to get it right. But in order to do that, you've got to practice. And what are you practicing? You're practicing having mental models be more in alignment with reality. And not seeing those costs. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that teams get together, decide on something, and then leave. They spend 6 months of costs based on a mental model that they don't share. They actually are all thinking different things. And then 6 months later, they go, oh, we weren't even on the same page on this product. We were all building different products. Think of the cost of that mistake, right? And if you had just, quote unquote, slowed down or sped up your thinking at that moment 6 months earlier, you would have saved all that cost.
Which is interesting. It's obviously the same issue in the US as it is in Europe with that one as well. Yeah, and I guess one of the things you've developed to help people understand it, because it will come naturally for some more than others, won't it? So some will be able to sort of take the perspective of others, but you've developed a TQ, like an assessment tool to help people understand. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that just tries to identify how people perceive things and their natural aptitude for it.
The TQ, the thinking quotient, is the longer version of the name, is an edumetric test, which means it measures your skill level at a certain point of time, and you can take it again, to see if your skill level has increased. And what it does is it tells you on a continuum where your strengths and weaknesses are in distinction making, organizing systems into part whole, seeing relationships, articulating relationships, and the ability to take many perspectives. And what's nice is when you take the TQ, you get an instantaneous report that says, here's your pros and grows. Like, here's where you might want to focus a little bit more on this skill. And then it gives you a very specific set of things that you can do to practice and develop that skill itself.
Hi, we're just pausing this interview for a moment. Have you ever finished an episode of the OrgDev podcast and wish you had a cheat sheet that summarizes all of the key points? Us too. So we made one. It's called From Pod to Practice, and each week in our newsletter we'll share a 2-page summary of the latest OrgDev episode, and it includes key takeaways, a reflection prompt, and one small action you can try.
And it's all in a digital format with space at the end to add your own notes and reflections, and it's designed to help you take the learning from the podcast into your day-to-day work. So to get your copy, just sign up to our Next Step to Better newsletter. The link's in the show notes, or you can visit our website at www.distinction.live to get the latest From Pod to Practice in your inbox. And let us know what you think. We'd love to get your feedback.
But I guess one of the things we always like to ask is, what was your journeys into systems thinking? I'm assuming like at age 16, you didn't decide, right, I'm going to specialize in systems thinking forever. What was your pathway into it?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's like that's a long story, but I mean, probably the best way I can describe it is it was very, if you've seen the movie Forrest Gump, it was sort of very Forrest Gumpian. It didn't take a straight path. Um, I was a high school dropout, and the only skill that I had was really climbing and going in the mountains, and so I used that skill for many years. And being in the mountains, being with groups, watching the social dynamics and all the dynamics of being in complex systems all around us, really fascinated me. And I was trying to figure out how do I understand the micro dynamics of snow and avalanches and the macro dynamics of, climate and weather and the social dynamics of 10 people either getting along or not getting along. And what are the patterns that underlie all these dynamics and all these systems, essentially, that you have to take into account? And so I started working on a theory, essentially a mathematical construct for those patterns. My dad was a mathematician and my mother was a quilter, so I grew up with patterns because quilting and mathematics are just really patterns. And so I looked at patterns across knowledge and across the systems. And it took a long time, but that really was how I came to it. And then, like Laura said, I ended up doing my doctoral dissertation at Cornell, and the National Science Foundation asked for us to get the theory out in the world more, to tell more people. At the time, I was just training scientists and doctoral students and things like that. And that's where I met Laura. And I Laura doesn't take credit for this, but it was kind of a big moment when on the grant, we were actually flying, we were on a plane in the airport. And she said, well, you're going to have to tell me this theory because we have to get it out in the world. And so I scribbled it on the back of the airplane ticket for about 5-6 minutes. And she said, oh, okay. Now I understand. And she said, I know exactly what we need to do. And I said, well, really? Because I have no idea what we need to do for this grant. She said, we need to go teach kindergartners. And so we spent 10 years teaching kindergartners and first graders and third graders and eighth graders. And it really forces you to speak it in a more applicable way, a more tangible way. And today we teach executives at the highest level. We teach special forces operators. We teach Olympic athletes. We teach professional athletes. We teach high-end people. And we teach them the exact same things that we teach kindergartners and first graders and third graders. There's no difference. The only difference is the information or the content or the systems that they apply it to. But the actual, what we teach them is the same.
And it does work, because I've been practicing making distinctions, and it is, once you start doing it, it's like, oh my God, like you start to really break things down, and you see the world in a different way, don't you?
Yeah.
And Laura, how was your journey for you?
Oh, I took a very different path. I mean, I not to brag, I was a star student. I was not a dropout, which I'm not sure is a good thing now that I understand. I was indoctrinated by the school system. But then I ended up at Cornell, and I was really interested in how we take the knowledge we have in academia, how we can take, how to really understand how government programs helped vulnerable families. I grew up in a single parent household. I experienced economic hardship after divorce and all of that. So I was really interested in, how do we take what we know and what we're learning in places like universities to really help human lives and improve the condition of humans. So that led me into policy analysis, which then eventually segued into translational research, which is how do we take these theories and all of this great richness that we have at universities and translate it into tools that really better communities and help people in the community, specifically around those universities. And that's when I crossed paths with this one. And I had not even ever heard of systems thinking. I had no idea what it was. But then he explained it to me, and it made great sense. And the rest is history, right, Derek?
Yeah.
There. Yeah.
But it's such an important role, isn't it? Because there's so much quality academic research that never makes the transition over to something that's usable or in society or business as well. I guess is that one of the sort of the main drivers of your work, is to try and help people to understand all the good thinking and the empirical research that goes behind it.
It really is. And we call ourselves a science to society lab for that reason, because both Laura and I, feel very strongly that we, as scientists, we have an ethical obligation to the people who pay for the science to get value out of the science. And citizens pay for the science, and so they should get the value out of the science. And all too often, the science is kind of hidden in, difficult translation, or journals that nobody has access to, and things like that. So I think we have a dual lab role where we do the science, but we also spend almost as much time translating the science. And I think that's where Laura and I kind of, when we met, that was kind of the connection that really spawned the lab. Married and all that kind of stuff too.
Right. Secondary. That's
another podcast we like to.
No, the only other thing I was going to say is, a lot of it is about, if you think about the kinds of struggles that people have and the problems that people face, all of those things originate in their mental models. And so to me, helping people understand first and foremost that they are building mental models, how they're building mental models, and then how they can change their mental models to be better aligned with reality and have better outcomes. To me, that is the greatest gift you can give to people. It liberates people from all kinds of difficulty and suffering, and it really creates a lot of agency and empowerment, from within. And it's no secret, or maybe it is a secret. To Derek and I, we would love for this to be free for the whole world all the time, every day, all day. And that's what we're working towards, right? Our goal is to have a foundation and just bring it out into the world and just really actually change things for everyone at the individual level. And then, that's going to work its way up to the societal level and then the global level. So we really want, when we say world domination, we don't mean it in a bad way. We mean like world liberation.
For good.
Liberation. We want world liberation. Right?
Fabulous. It's such an important goal. So one of the questions we like to ask, you do so much, what brings you real joy? Which bits of your work really kind of spark joy for you?
I'll tell you, one day Laura and I we had a talk, and we had to get a cab, like one of these livery cabs, like long distance cab. And I literally hadn't slept in days, and I'm in the back of the cab, and we have to drive like 2 hours to get to this other talk that I have to give. And I'm driving, the guy's driving, and it's like, I don't even know what time it is. It's like really late, and I got to be at another place. And I'm just completely out of it, right? And I'm like kind of dozing off in the back seat, and I open my eyes, and the guy's like staring at me in the mirror, and I go, "How you doing?" And he goes, "You're Derek Cabrera," and I go, "Yeah." And I thought, he has my name, because he picked me up. And he goes, "I'm reading your book right now," and he pulls it out of the driver's seat, out of the passenger seat. And I go, what got you to read this book? Really strange. And he goes, "My daughter," and he goes on and on and on about his daughter, and he's so proud of her. She made it to Columbia Education School, and, he's doing all this work. She's reading it there, and she loved it. So she sent it to my wife and I, and blah, blah, blah. And we started reading it, and we got so much. And to be honest, when the work hit, when just regular everyday life kind of applications happen of the work, that's honestly the best feeling in the world. When a guy that's driving a cab finds value, that's meaningful.
Well, I think, it is that it's those moments where you see that it's actually touching and helping somebody think something through. So many, many years ago, when we were working in a Pennsylvania school district, we were lucky enough to become involved with their residential center for students who had gotten into disciplinary problems, pretty serious disciplinary problems. So they were actually in it's like PINS, person in need of supervision. And there's this lovely young man who had been put in this situation for something he did that was fairly fairly damaging to another person. And we were using systems thinking DSRP to work in his biology class around some concepts of biology. We spent some time there, and then I guess about a week or two later, we got home and we got a letter from this young man. And he said, I just want to let you know, the next day that I was in my counseling session, my therapy session, which is to deal with his victimization, and he said, I actually used what you taught me on biology to understand the things that trigger me to harm people, to do things that I know are bad. And he said, and now I understand. And now I know I won't do it again. And I'm going to be, a productive member of society. I'm going to finish this program. And to me, and that was a young man. And you think about the trajectory of his life, not just his life, but his sense of himself. It's completely different. And that to me is, it's, we've got all kinds of stories, but that one really stuck for us because this kid really needed help.
One of the most remarkable things about sort of producing so much content, putting it out there, you never quite know how the world's going to consume it and the way in which they'll apply it. And I guess you must hear lots of really interesting stories about how people are picking your work up and the difference it's making.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. Like you never know how it's going to get applied or what thing is going to hit somebody the right way. And, but it does make a huge difference when we hear those stories. That really motivates us massively to continue and do the hard work of getting it out there and doing the science and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I also think that was a lot of the impetus for the podcast. Let's just talk about this in front of as many people as we can, because maybe it'll help more people.
Yeah, our students at Cornell told us you have to do a podcast for like 10 years. And we always said, I don't really know what a podcast is. Like I honestly had no idea what a podcast was. I didn't even understand why anybody would listen to a podcast. And then I started I'm like, okay, I got to figure out what a podcast is. And so I would, during my workouts, I would put on a podcast, and I was like, oh, okay. I kind of get it. I'm starting to get it, and then we said, okay, let's do a podcast. They keep telling us we need to do a podcast, and it's been great. I mean, it's been wild. It's been a wild journey, but I just think when you have what DSRP does is it gives you almost like having a user manual for your brain, and your brain's doing everything. So when you understand it, it just, like Laura was saying, it completely liberates you. It completely gives you agency over your life, over your emotions, over your thoughts, over your actions, over your problems. It just gives you personal agency so much that I think it has a huge impact on people, no matter what, wherever they are in life, whatever age, whatever they're doing. It just kind of it has a liberating power to it.
Like you did an episode, it was a vignette, which is like nothing happens suddenly. And it's kind of sort of making the relationship between cause and effect. And, again, these are sort of like really essential tools or ways of thinking for modern living, aren't they? Like just getting people to actually slow down and with the person you talked about, understanding what your actions do and the effect that they have. And it doesn't happen instantaneously. It happens later on. I think you sort of said, is it cause and effect and not neighbours on a timeline?
Yes, right.
was a great saying as well. What's particularly interesting you in the field of systems thinking at the moment?
Well, right now we're working a lot on what's called DSRP therapy. We're working with counselors and therapists, and we're working on things like trauma and PTSD, and really looking at studying how does this work as a therapy, as a in particular on very difficult problems, right? And to me, I like working on problems that are like the hardest problems, and so some of these are problems that we're not able to solve as a society, and yet we're seeing really remarkable effects on them. So that's really exciting to me right now.
We work with organisations and leaders all the time, and a lot of our audience will be doing that as well. What can we do to really help organisations and leaders really understand the value of systems thinking and become better commissioners of kind of bringing that into their organisations? Have you got any ideas or tips for people listening, thinking this is just what the people I'm working with need?
I mean, I think for us, when we work with organizations in particular, a lot of the conversation stems around the connection between how they're thinking about things and the outcomes that they're getting, right? And getting people to understand that the crux of it all is their mental models and the degree to which they are understanding how they're building their own and how other people are building their mental models, how they can work together to build a shared mental model. Because in organizations, that's what really is the crux of it. Are we all on the same page before we start investing time and effort? And then also being open to the concept of, because of love reality being a loop, that as you're getting feedback from the external environment or your customers or your clients, you might need to actually modify and evolve your mental model and keep going around that loop. I mean, that's really what businesses need to do to survive, right? Is constantly adapt to those kinds of things.
Well, and the other thing I guess I would mention, you mentioned Flock, Not Clock. That's our other book, and what we teach kind of two big tracks at Cornell. One is the individual level systems thinking, and one is the organizational level systems thinking. And so Flock, Not Clock is about more the organizational level, but the two are obviously related, right? Because individuals work in organizations. And so if the individuals aren't systems thinking, then the organization's not gonna. But at the organizational level, it's about another theory called VMCL, which is vision, mission, capacity, and learning. And so really getting an understanding of how to design better visions, better missions, how mission affects vision, how capacity drives mission, and how organizational learning and culture drives capacity. And then obviously systems thinking drives that organizational learning. So a lot of what we work with in organizations is, yes, training the individuals as systems thinkers, but also training the organizational leaders how to design better organizations.
You've actually helped me fall back in love with mission and vision. It's done so badly in organizations. It's so bad. But the way you described it it just really makes sense. It's like the vision, mission moments, is it capacity sexy? Is that that was a slogan, wasn't it?
Capacity sexy, which is amazing.
Who knew? But it is. If you do get a chance to watch those podcast episodes, they're really worth watching. And in the book, Flock, Not Clock, you really lay out it really, really well. One of the things you talked about, which was just such a brilliant way of seeing organizations, is it POSWADE?
Awesome.
The point of the system is what it does, or something like that.
Yeah, POSWADE is
brilliant.
The acronym for the purpose of a system is what it does. And so a lot of times we'll have these aspirational visions, but really what we want to look at is, what's the organization doing? The organization has a vision. Whether or not it matches your aspirational vision is up for question. And so what we ideally want to do is have our aspirational vision and our actual vision that the organization is behaving as to be the same thing, but they're often not. What VMCL does is fundamentally get us to look at our organization more like an organism, a living, breathing organism, which it is, made up of people, socio-technical systems, all kinds of things going on. But rather than looking at it like a machine or a clock, we look at it more like an organism, or like a flock of birds, a bunch of birds together that are working together to evade prey or attack something or whatever. So our organizations are much more like living organisms than they are like machines. And that is the fundamental metaphor that we've used for the last 100 years, is that of the clock. And we treat our organizations like clocks, and they're really not. They're more like living organisms.
Well, and the thing about that is, like you were saying, Derek, that, treat them more like an organism, is what a lot of people don't realize is all systems and human organizations, they have a goal state or a vision. They have something that they're doing on the ground to accomplish that goal state, which is the mission. They have the capacity to do that or not. And they have the ability to learn from the environment or not. So what we want leaders to do is see that these are four natural sort of inherent functions to their organization. And if they understand them, and they understand the difference between them and the relationship among them, then they can leverage that knowledge to actually the better outcomes that they're seeking, right? I mean, one of the things people don't seem to realize is that there's a culture to your organization, right? And a leader has the ability to either shape that culture or not, but there's going to be a culture either way. So what a lot of leaders that we work with don't realize is there are things you can do to really enculturate the mental models of the vision and the mission, you really build that culture around those two things rather than have sort of that subversive or counterculture that will emerge if you're not purposeful in your leadership around that. So I think that's the thing about Flock Not Clock is it gets you to see that very differently, the sort of metaphor of a biological organism rather than a mechanical thing.
Yeah, and you talked about because it's that real leaders being intentional about what they're doing and how they're building it as well. Because often things are just thrown together, aren't they? The mission is kind of like just regurgitated kind of words, isn't it?
Kind of like what Laura just said is that ties the two conversations that we've just had together. Is that a vision really isn't a statement that you put on the wall. A vision isn't a sentence. A vision is a mental model that everyone in your organization either has and shares or doesn't. And if they don't have and share that mental model, then you don't have that vision. What makes a vision happen is that all the individuals in the organization have a shared mental model of where they're going. And what makes a mission exist is that all the individuals in the organization have a shared mental model of how to get there. And so it really kind of ties back to, well, it's driven by mental models. And that's the leader's job, is to make sure that everybody understands and shares the same mental model. Not the same sentence, not a something in a frame on a wall or on a website, but in hearts and minds of people.
It's quite a big question, but when you look back at over your careers, what's the biggest lesson that you learned that you'd share with others?
I think, the biggest lesson, there's a very great scientist that I respect greatly named Richard Feynman. He was a quantum physicist. And I believe it was his wife who said, "Why do you care what other people think?" And she constantly was and he actually wrote a book with this title, or a chapter, if I'm remembering incorrectly. But I think a lot of it is like in your younger years, you worry about what other people think and what they're gonna think. And I think as you get a little bit older and long in the tooth, you realize, like, there's a lot of people in the world. Some of them are going to not like you, and some of them are going to like you, and some of them are going to disagree with you, and some of them aren't. And you just got to follow what drives you and be okay with where you end up, and follow your passion and follow what's good for, do something good in the world. Don't focus on yourself, focus on others. You'll always be happy if you're focused on others. And it's this weird paradox, which is the best way to take care of yourself is to take care of others. And so you don't have to worry about it. And yeah, I think probably those two, don't worry too much about what other people think about whatever it is you're doing, and do good. Just keep doing good, even if it's a pain in the ass.
Even if you're tired in a cab.
Even if you're tired.
Just keep doing it.
A lot of people that you're trying to do good for, they don't want the help, but try do it anyway, kind of thing.
Yeah. You're hard to follow, Derek Cabrera. Well, I would say for me, at the time that I learned about these ideas and learned about the theory, I was actually struggling on many fronts, professionally and personally. And so I actually witnessed my own transformation. And I think the biggest thing I've learned is it is possible to get out of your own way. And that the key to that liberation from your own self is really understanding your mental models, how you're building them, why you're building them, and how to get them better aligned with sort of the reality of the situation. And once you get there, you can actually sort of unlock your own jail cell and thrive. Just do whatever you want, adapt. Embrace the crazy and have fun, totally different. It's totally different. I wish you knew me 35 years ago and you knew me now, you'd be like, wow, how possible.
Brilliant. Well, we want to say a huge thank you. We've really, really enjoyed this. It's been so insightful. You've really brought the book, the podcast, and everything to life. If people want to follow your work, what is the best way for them to do it? You're doing things like the world's biggest systems thinking conference that's coming up live. You've got training camp. What's the best way for you to start following your work and engaging with the things that you're doing?
I'd probably go to cabreralab.org and everything is there, or go on YouTube for Cabrera Lab podcast and, that type of thing. If you just search Google, if you can't remember those, you'll probably find us somewhere.
Findable.
We're findable.
Well, thank you so much. I want to just say firstly a huge thank you. You're probably one of the biggest inspirations I've had professionally in the 20 years that I've been doing it. We are doing a lot of complex work out in the field, and the way in which you've put together this, the way in which you've sort of also not just put the work out there, but supported it with things like the podcast has been a big inspiration. So we really want as many people as possible to watch the podcast, to engage in training camp, to go to the Systems Thinking Conference as well. So thank you. Danny, what are you taking away from today's conversation?
Lots of things. I think the few things that stuck with me were talking about reality being patient, and it will give you the feedback, and will keep giving you the feedback until you listen to it. So that stuck with me. And I think the importance of understanding our mental models, that, really taking that time to explore the mental models we're holding, and then work with others that we're working with to get those shared mental model between us, and keep that up to date and keep evolving that.
Well, thank you so much, Derek and Laura. If you are watching this podcast and you think someone you know would find it really useful in being introduced to the world of systems thinking and Derek and Laura's work, please do share it. We have a huge number of shares every single week from people just wanting for others in different organisations to get into it as well. So thank you so much. But most importantly, thank you so much, Derek and Laura. It's been brilliant. We've loved it. And good luck with everything as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun.